Alright guys, BLM here, back with a new video. In this video, we're back talking about Sasuke. Now, back in Sasuke 38, we did see a Kanzen Seiha at the end of the tournament. And with the tradition being that we get a modified course after every Kanzen Seiha, I thought it'd be fun to talk about my course predictions for Sasuke 39. Now, within this video, I'll be talking about the entire course of Sasuke 38, running through the course obstacle by obstacle. But before we do that, I feel like we should just talk about some general things here first. Now, first up, obviously the idea that we're going to be getting a completely redesigned course is kind of unrealistic at this point. Like, obviously between Sasuke's 17 and 18, we got a almost entirely new course, and that was really awesome. To see this transition to Shin Sasuke, this new era of the show, really did feel impactful at the time. However, I think something you have to recognize about that is that the show had a much bigger budget at that point and had much higher ratings. And at the point that we're currently at with Sasuke, the budget is a lot smaller. And that's a lot of the reason why we see such minimal changes between tournaments at this point, is because of a lack of money to be able to make new obstacles. And that is something we're definitely going to be factoring in here. Obviously, like, we can't expect a fully redesigned course because that's just unrealistic. I do think the type of redesign that we're going to get is similar to that of like a Sasuke 5. Obviously, a Sasuke 32 would be a good example as well, considering that's the most recent one. But I do think we're going to get a somewhat similar course, but with a couple of modifications that are some pretty major ones. So with that said, let's get started running through the course, and let's just generally talk about stage 1 first. I don't expect to see major changes here. Obviously, it would be cool if we did. I do think there are definitely obstacles within this stage 1 that are pretty stale, but there's also some obstacles here that I really like still, and I don't really feel like we need to see a major modification here, particularly with the back portion of the course. I think the back portion of the course is pretty good. It's mainly the first few obstacles that are kind of bad. And let's just get started talking about the obstacles themselves. So we're going to start off obviously with the quad step into rolling hill combo that does start off the first stage and has started off the first stage since Sasuke 32, and obviously the rolling hill itself has been there since Sasuke 31. I want to get rid of this. I really do. I mean, I really hope we get rid of this, because to me, this is like the most boring obstacle to watch on stage 1 at this point, especially because we see it over and over and over again, and it's a really long obstacle. Like, for being the first obstacle of the course, it takes up a good chunk of time. And I really do feel like the first obstacle of stage 1 should be a relatively short one, especially because it's an obstacle that isn't going to take out any major competitors anymore. Like it did obviously earlier on. Like when we saw the rolling hill get first introduced, like we had so many big names, if not fail it, then almost fail. Like obviously we saw Takeda and Shingo fail it back to back, and that was hilarious. We saw Drew almost fail it. We saw Kano and Urushihara and Ragivaru at points fail it. We've seen like Jamie Ron fail it in Sasuke 37. So like there have been some notable fails on the rolling hill, but I just really want this obstacle gone at this point. Again, it was cool when it was first brought back, with this essentially being a modification of the Maruta Nobori and Kudari, which were obstacles from the first Sasuke, and the Maruta Nobori being the first obstacle of Sasuke up to Sasuke 7. So it's like, it's a cool callback, but at this point, we don't need it anymore. Like, I feel like it's so boring to watch at this point. Now, the question is, what do you do to replace it? I personally wouldn't mind just another step obstacle. I mean, like, I think the thing is, we're going to get a step obstacle as the first obstacle. I feel pretty confident about that at this point, because again, I feel like at this point, Sasuke is really trying to associate itself with the rest of the Ninja Warrior brand. And so much of Ninja Warrior at this point is associated with the first obstacle being some sort of step obstacle. So because of that, I do expect the first obstacle to still be some sort of step obstacle. I would like it to be something else. Like, I wouldn't mind a sliding obstacle as the first obstacle. Like, I talked about this in my Sasuke 38 review. I wouldn't mind the silk slider as the first obstacle. Maybe make it harder, but to have that as the first obstacle wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. But I think more than likely we're going to get a step obstacle. To be honest, I don't think it really matters which one it is. Like, at this point, I just want a quick obstacle. Just get a quick obstacle, get it done, get to better obstacles later down in the course. I wouldn't mind the step slider returning. I don't think the step slider was that bad of an obstacle to begin with. I don't know why they really got rid of it outside of just having a redesigned course. But then again, they replaced the quintuple step in Sasuke 28. So it's like, why do we even bring that back to begin with? I think the dome steps is a pretty fun iteration of it. The one that they used in Sasuke 25, though, there were some rules involved with that I did not particularly like, where like if you used your hands, you were DQ'd, so that was kind of dumb. Really, any step obstacle, though, would do. As to be honest, this first obstacle isn't that important to me. Again, bring something new, bring something old, doesn't really matter. It's probably going to be a step obstacle, though. Now, the next obstacle from Sasuke 38 was the silk slider. This has got to go, at least in its current placement. I mean, in the first place, like, this was mostly just a filler obstacle. Like, if you don't know what happened, obviously we had the wing slider before this, which was a much more dangerous obstacle. An obstacle that did actually take out some people. The silk slider was really just a joke, but a lot of the reason why the wing slider had to be taken out was due to COVID reasons, with it being pretty difficult to clean in between runs. So now we're assuming that it's still going to have COVID restrictions and everything. So it's like, I guess they probably can't bring the wing slider back, but like, I wouldn't be opposed to just getting a harder version of the wing slider, maybe have bigger drops. That wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. Something I really, really want, though, I would really love the rolling escargot. I know they took it out because it was too difficult after Sasuke 28, but I really, really would love to see it back. I think for a renewal tournament, I think it's kind of perfect too. Where do you think it's a difficult enough obstacle to where it's definitely going to take out some people throughout the course? It's a really fun obstacle to watch. I really just love the rolling escargot. I mean, it's one of my favorite stage 1 obstacles ever, but I also feel like it's an obstacle that certain people know what to do at this point. I feel like there are ways to game the obstacle where you can jump early. Like, it's not a brutal obstacle, especially if you have an elite enough field of competitors. Plus, also, I feel like it's really going to be one that really cuts down the field a bit, in the sense that one of my biggest issues with Sasuke 38 was that the beginning portion of the course was so easy that we were essentially seeing everyone get to the dragon glider and just failing there. I do feel like the rolling escargot would add some challenge back before the dragon glider, which we'll talk about later. So that would be my choice. Again, realistically, I probably see a new obstacle here. I don't know what it would be. Again, like some sort of log obstacle would probably make sense. But even if it's not that, I expect it to be some sort of slider obstacle, considering that's obviously what we have had for a while now. An obstacle that requires holding on to some sort of thing as it slides down the track. Again, that's probably what we're going to see here. But again, my personal choice would be rolling escargot. Next up, we got the fishbone. And I'm hit or miss on the fishbone. I could get rid of it. I could keep it. I'm not really super decisive on it either way. I mean, I think more than likely we're going to see it stay. I think I would predict that it's going to stay, considering it just seems like Inui loves the obstacle. He obviously built it originally for Kunoichi, moved it on to Sasuke, and has modified it numerous times now on Sasuke, but it's still there. Like, maybe increase the speed of the pillars. I think that might be a fun thing to do. Maybe make the gaps a bit bigger. Maybe that would be cool. I don't know. I mean, like, I think there's things you could do with the fishbone. I'm not opposed to keeping it there. I do think it needs some sort of modification, though, and get rid of the rule where you can't skip pedestals. That's just dumb. Well, overall, I do feel like the fishbone is a fun obstacle to watch, and it can be a time waster for later down the course. I think overall I'm pretty okay with it. But again, if you were to replace it, I don't even know where you would really go. I mean, I guess it would probably have to be some sort of new obstacle, maybe a new balance obstacle. Maybe you can take from A&W, get some of their balance obstacles, but again, I don't think any of them are that great. You can bring back the spin bridge, but at that point, like with spin bridge, rolling escargot, we're pretty much going back to Sasuke 28, aren't we? I don't know. Like, I feel like for the most part, I'm just kind of fine with the fishbone being there. Next up, we got the dragon glider, and I will put my foot down on this. We need the dragon glider back. I love the dragon glider. It's one of my favorite Sasuke obstacles ever at this point. I think it's such a brilliant modification of the double dipper from A&W. And also, it's still done a lot of damage. Like we just saw in Sasuke 38, it just decimated the field, taking out a whole bunch of elite competitors. Like, I think the dragon glider needs to stay. Now, I think the one issue with the dragon glider for me personally is the fact that it does take up a lot of space. Now, if you don't know, the reason why we don't have an obstacle after the warp wall at this point is because of the amount of space that the dragon glider takes, and through that they don't have space for another obstacle, which I'm completely fine with. Again, like, I think it makes stage 1 a speed course once again, which I think it needs to stay as, because that's what's most interesting to me, at least. But overall, like, I want the Dragon Glider to stay. It's a fun obstacle. It's probably one of the best obstacles they've made in a while. I think it needs to be there. If you were to change it out, I don't even know what you would replace it with, because to be honest, I don't think there's a better option at this point. I think you would need something new, and even if you make something new, it's like, what's going to be better than the Dragon Glider? I think it's a perfect obstacle for me personally. I don't need to see it go. Now for the final obstacle of stage 1, and that is the tackle to warp wall combo. And this one's interesting because Inui, the director of Sasuke, has said a while back now that he eventually wants to replace all the iconic obstacles of Sasuke, with those essentially being like the salmon ladder, warp wall, cliffhanger, that sort of stuff. And he hasn't done it yet. Obviously, I think a lot of that has to do with money issues, with the fact that they're not able to put the money into building replacements for those, but also I feel like some of that has to do with the connection to A&W. I do feel like the warp wall in particular, being the last obstacle, is something that Sasuke just likes doing to further associate itself with Ninja Warrior as a brand, which typically has its first round end with the warped wall. And I feel like that's a similar sort of situation here. I also feel like having the warp wall as the last obstacle makes the warp wall a much more thrilling obstacle, where really the entire run comes down to 1 or 2 attempts on the warp wall. And it is really tense to see those attempts there, as someone could have a perfect run up until then, but then still miss the wall 2 times and instantly fail afterwards. So, I mean, if you don't know where I'm going with this, I want the warp wall to stay. The question is, do I want the warp wall tackle combo? And I'm leaning towards no. I think you can do a couple things. Like, the thing is, like, I think the tackle is perfect as a filler obstacle before the warp wall, as obviously it tires your legs. It makes it so your stamina is lessened by the time you get to the warp wall. Like, I think it makes sense as an obstacle right before it, but I actually think maybe what we should do is just increase the size of the warp wall, make it a bit taller, and then maybe just add in another obstacle. Now, I don't know if you make an obstacle beforehand, like another just filler obstacle, but again, at that point, like, why not just keep the tackle at that point? I think my ideal situation, this is never happening, I would like warp wall into flying chute and have the flying chute as the final obstacle. I love the flying chute. Flying chute's another one of my favorite obstacles of all time, especially the Sasuke 19 version of it. Like, I get why it's not there anymore. It is very prone to having injuries on it, and I don't even think it passes health and safety at this point. But it's like, I love that obstacle so much. It would be so great to have the warp wall into flying chute and have the flying chute as the final obstacle of the course. I think it would make those 2 obstacles really, really tense. Is it happening? No, it's not. But that would be my ideal. What I think is realistic is I think we're probably keeping this placement. I think warp wall is probably going to be the last obstacle. The question is, do they keep the tackle or not? And what do they replace it with? I think more than likely they keep the tackle. But if they do change it up, I mean, I don't know what else you would go with. Like, we've seen A&W try to have the wall lift before the tackle, but to me, it doesn't make as much sense. I just feel like the tackle is a much better obstacle to have there. I mean, you need something that tires out the legs. I mean, that's really the point of having it before the warp wall. So, again, like, they would need to create something new, but really, like, I'm fine with it staying. Like, if it goes, it goes. I would prefer it to go, but if it stays, I'm not that upset either. Really, for me, with this entire stage 1, I'm really fine with the fishbone on. Like, yes, I think there should be modifications to, like, the fishbone to make it slightly more difficult. I think the warp wall should be made slightly more difficult, but I'm really fine with that portion of the course. It's really the beginning of the course that I do want to see a change in. But now for stage 2, and stage 2 as a whole, let's just get this out of the way. I want it to be completely modified. It's not happening. I don't think it's happening. And if it happens, it's going to be in a way that I don't want it to happen. But ideally, I would like stage 2 to go back to being the speed course that it was back in the pre-Sasuke 17 days. It's not going to be, though, because, one, again, I think it would take up a lot of the budget to change up stage 2. Plus, also, I think they were pretty happy with how stage 2 played out in Sasuke 38. And to be fair, I was happy with how Sasuke 38 played out in terms of stage 2, because I think stage 2, the modification that they made there were by adding the rolling log at the beginning, made stage 2 the most riveting it's been in a while. But I still want everything else to change. I still think it's a boring course. And the only reason it was somewhat interesting is because we did see some timeouts. And some other people just like being discombobulated due to the rolling log. But realistically, the course is still really boring, and I want it to change, but it's not going to. And again, as I said, if it's going to, Inui has talked about this in the past, that if he had his wishes, the entire stage 2 would be an underwater course, which is like, that's not what I want. That's the complete opposite of what I want. Get rid of the backstream. We'll talk about the backstream, but it's like, why are we doing an underwater course? No one wants that, right? Like, I don't even want one underwater obstacle, let alone the entire thing being underwater. But whatever, let's run through obstacle by obstacle. First up, rolling log. I'm fine with it. I mean, the thing is, like, if we're going to keep the modern stage 2, like, we need the rolling log there. Like, that's what makes stage 2 interesting now. With such a tight time limit, the rolling log being a big time waster, it also making contestants dizzy before the salmon ladder, which can cause some interesting results. So I think the rolling log needs to stay. I do question the type of rolling log that we have, because the type of rolling log that we have is very much like the A&W style of rolling log, which actually probably does work out better here than what the old stage 1 rolling log used to be. But I do think that also makes it a lot more prone to being stuck, which can kind of cause some wonky fails there. But overall, though, like, if we're going to keep a pretty similar stage 2, I think keep the rolling log. Ideally, though, I would rather it go for a more dynamic opening to the stage, but it's fine. Next up, we got the up-down salmon ladder. And I mean, for me, I want this to go. I'm done with the salmon ladder. I mean, I'm done with, especially with the up-down salmon ladder. Like, to me, this is just so boring to watch at this point. And I feel this way with every salmon ladder across all the Ninja Warrior shows that I watch. Like, the salmon ladder is just such a boring obstacle at this point because so many people have trained on it. And we've just seen it so many times in so many different iterations that I just don't want to see it anymore. Again, will it happen? I don't know. Actually, to be honest, I think the salmon ladder is definitely the one that is most likely to go out of the big 3 Sasuke obstacles that I talked about earlier. Again, warp wall, salmon ladder, cliffhanger. I think salmon ladder is the most likely to go. That being said, though, I still think it's probably going to stay, at least in some form. Like, I could see them modifying it, but it's like, what do you do with it, though? Again, like, considering the amount of space that they have to work with, it's like, what do you do with the salmon ladder here? Because the reason why we have the up-down salmon ladder in the way it is because they have that very limited amount of space there to fill in. And I think you would have to radically change the course if you were wanting to put, like, a more interesting obstacle there. To be honest, my ideal right here, I think I would actually prefer a Wingnut Alley-esque obstacle. Like, I know a lot of people hate Wingnut Alley from A&W. They think it's too difficult. I actually really like Wingnut Alley, and if they could get rid of, like, the salmon ladder, get rid of the spider walk, and just replace it with Wingnut Alley, I would be fine with that. I would be okay with that. I think it would be a lot of fun, especially have them do Wingnut Alley immediately after the rolling log. Like, I think it would be cool. I would be okay with that. Will it happen? No, it will not. I can guarantee you that. But to be honest, like, even if we replace the salmon ladder with just the wing nuts, I think that's okay too. Like, just get rid of the salmon ladder. Like, I don't need it there anymore. And speaking of that, we're moving on to the spider walk. Same thing. Spider walk, the spider drop, get rid of it. I don't need this at all, really. I really want this gone. Even more so than salmon ladder. I would get rid of the spider walk before a salmon ladder. Spider walk to me is just so pointless. It's such an easy obstacle, just a time waster. No real reason to be there. I mean, if we can do salmon ladder into wing nut, I would be okay with that too. Not the worst thing in the world. Or even like salmon ladder into roulette row, or like one of those style of obstacles. Like just something else. Don't get rid of this. Replace it with a relatively quick, fun obstacle to watch. And I mean, I guess at this point we could skip forward to the backstream as well. Get rid of the backstream. I don't want the backstream at all. Again, I would... Okay, this is the order of elimination for me in terms of stage 2. Get rid of backstream number 1. Get rid of spider walk number 2. Get rid of salmon ladder number 3. This is such a boring stretch of obstacles. It's like, I really don't want these obstacles in stage 2. And really, like, just give me a quick, fast stage 2 at this point. It's like, why are we having these obstacles that take a decent amount of time or are also just boring to watch? Bring me back the metal spin. I love the metal spin. I think the metal spin's a failable obstacle, but also a really quick obstacle. Why do we have an unfailable, boring obstacle like the backstream to watch instead? It's like, please get rid of it. It's not happening, and Nui loves it. I don't know why he loves it, because it hasn't done anything in forever. And even when it did do something, it was because they kept on changing the power of the jets all the time. It's like, can we just like get rid of it, please? Again, that would be my ideal. I think my ideal, actually, I think after talking about it a bit more, I think probably like salmon ladder into wing nut into metal spin. That would be awesome. Or salmon ladder into wing nut into roulette row. Anything like that, I'm fine with. Do it, please. Don't just make another like really dragged out, boring stage 2 that we skip through every time anyway. Like, make it at least something interesting to watch and something that's also failable. Again, it just gets kind of boring that after Salmon Ladder, like all we just see is like timeouts. Like I really just want an overly failable stage 2, but I guess that's not what Inui wants. Next up, we got the Conveyor Belt. I mean, in my opinion, just get rid of it. Like I don't know why the Conveyor Belt's even here anymore. And especially if we're adding like better obstacles before the Conveyor Belt. I feel like the Conveyor Belt is something that we can just entirely scrap. We don't need it there. It's boring to watch. It has some dumb rule that you can't use the sides that they sometimes enforce, sometimes don't. It's like, can we just get rid of this? Again, another obstacle I just don't want on the course. And then we end the stage with the wall lift. I think wall lift can stay. The wall lift and rolling log are literally the only 2 obstacles on the course that I'm like 100% okay with. But really, it's just that middle section of the stage that's so boring that I really want them to change, but it just doesn't seem like Inui feels like he needs to change it. And if he does, it feels like he needs to change it for the worse, where again, he talks about wanting an all underwater stage 2. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw the stage 2 for Sasuke 38 and it turns out we have like 3 water obstacles back to back to back, which again, I really, really don't want. But I mean, to be fair, even then, at least it would be new. At least it would be not the same like spider walk, salmon ladder, whatever, like boring stuff that we've seen for a while now. So even though it's not the direction I want stage 2 to be going, at least it would be something. Again, my ideal, again, like I would like obstacles like the wing nuts and roulette row and possibly return of the metal spin. Again, some of these failable, quicker obstacles. I mean, to be fair, wing nuts is not super quick, but at least it's a very failable obstacle, which again, stage 2 doesn't really have that much of. But with that, let's move on to stage 3, which I don't expect to see major changes on stage 3. I think we're going to see one major change that I would be pretty surprised if they don't do, which we will be talking about. But I think for the most part, stage 3 is going to stay relatively the same because, I mean, stage 3 is almost unbeatable in its current form anyway. Like, we really only see one person even be able to beat its current iteration, in that being Morimoto. And to be honest, I wouldn't be surprised if Inui goes out of his way to specifically build obstacles to take Morimoto down at this point, considering Morimoto is far and away the best Sasuke competitor in this era. And again, it's not really close. Like, he's the only person that I can see beating this current version of stage 3 with a workable Cliffhanger Dimension, with the vertical limit, with all these things. It's like, I feel like Morimoto is the only one that can do it. So I do feel like I wouldn't be surprised if Inui tries to build a course that actively tries to take Morimoto down. But to be honest, I don't even know what that would really have to be. I guess it would have to be a lot of like technical obstacles and a lot of newer technical obstacles, ones that he obviously wouldn't be able to train on right off the bat. So again, like I think like obstacles, obviously not these obstacles, but obstacles like the flying bar, obstacles like, I don't know, maybe like a cane lane from A&W, like obstacles like that aren't super trainable unless you have the recognition of like, this is going to be the obstacle there. Like obstacles that have a certain strategy to it, and whether or not you clear the obstacle being more so about that strategy than the actual raw strength that you have, which obviously Morimoto has in spades. But let's talk about the current stage. I mean, we started off with the combo of the flying bar into Sidewinder. I personally would like to see this go. I'm not that I'm like anti this obstacle. It's just that, again, I feel like this is like a combo that we've seen for too long already, and it just gets kind of boring at this point. I don't really know what you replace it with. I mean, I would want it to be something that drains you to a degree at least, because I would like it to be something to make the Cliffhanger Dimension a bit more difficult. And I know this is a complaint that a lot of people have with the current stage 3, is that it's so reliant around the cliffhanger. I personally don't mind it, as long as the obstacles before it are still entertaining to watch. And to be fair, I think the flying bar is still an entertaining obstacle. I don't think the Sidewinder is. So like, I wouldn't be upset if we got like a flying bar into something else, like something new. I just don't really have a great idea of what that would be. I mean, it would probably have to be a new obstacle, or maybe make flying bar the final obstacle again. And in turn, like, again, make these 2 obstacles to start the stage entirely new. Or, I mean, something that I don't think this would ever happen, but this would be fun, is if we got the flying bar into like the corkscrew from A&W, which is a really fun obstacle in A&W. I don't think that obstacle would pass health and safety in Japan though. And health and safety have become notoriously really strict in the recent years. And while there's obstacles that I think would have gotten the go ahead back in the day, I mean, back in the day we had like the flying chute, again, an obstacle that's probably really dangerous. Nowadays, I feel like there's no way they're going to allow an obstacle like the corkscrew on Sasuke, but it would be really fun. Maybe a cane lane, Maybe that's something that would be cool immediately after the flying bar. But it's like, again, like really at the end of the day, I don't have a solid answer here. Next up, we have the planet bridge. I could go with or without this. I mean, I think it's a quick enough obstacle to where I'm not like entirely bored by it, but it's also an obstacle that serves no real purpose in the current iteration, as I don't really feel like it tires you out that much. And also, it's not an obstacle that people are actually making mistakes on to fail it. So I don't think it really has that much of a purpose, even though I'm not actively against it. I don't really have a good sense of what they could do to the planet bridge to make it more dangerous. I guess you can just add like a whole bunch of gaps to the board where your feet are, but it's like really at the end of the day, it's like I would also just be fine if we got rid of this. I don't think we 100% need the planet bridge, but also I'm not like 100% against it either. Like if it stays, but really just mostly indifferent about it. Next up, we got the Cliffhanger Dimension, and I think this should stay. Knowing Inui, he'll probably just add in another crazy thing to make it even more difficult, but I think as is, I think the Cliffhanger Dimension is fine. It's a difficult enough obstacle. I mean, we only saw Morimoto clear it in the last tournament, though technically that Black Tiger was very close to clearing it as well, but it is a very difficult obstacle. It's a very technical obstacle. I wouldn't be surprised again if they add another element of timing to it to make it slightly more difficult, but I think in its current form, it does its job. I think it is at the difficulty it needs to be. The question is, what do you do after the Cliffhanger Dimension? Because this is the thing. I think what we should do to the Cliffhanger Dimension is add another obstacle immediately after this. Like, obviously, before we had the Ultra Crazy Cliffhanger into Vertical Limit, and at the time, that was like a ridiculous obstacle. No one's ever going to clear it. I don't think it's as ridiculous anymore. I think at this point, I think Morimoto needs an obstacle to that level to really give him a lot of difficulty. Mind you, I think Vertical Limit might be a bit too much. Again, Vertical Limit is a brutal obstacle in its own right, but I do think having another very grip-intensive obstacle immediately after Cliffhanger isn't the worst idea in the world. Like, the first obstacle that comes to my mind is the Curtain Cling. Like, maybe have a Curtain Cling immediately afterwards, but I think Curtain Cling is just not that interesting of an obstacle. And it's also an obstacle where you can technically use your feet, which kind of lessens the appeal of the obstacle. Though, I mean, wouldn't that be the worst thing in the world if you had Cliffhanger Dimension into Curtain Cling where you can use your feet immediately into Vertical Limit? Again, it's an insane combo, but I do feel like that wouldn't be the worst thing in the world to still give you a grip-intensive obstacle in between those obstacles and allow you to rest by allowing you to use your feet, which would allow you to regain some grip in your hands, but also still have this brutal obstacle immediately afterwards. Again, I think it is too insane of a combo to actually realistically do, especially considering the fact that let's just jump straight into Vertical Limit. I kind of want the Vertical Limit to be made more difficult. It's already brutal. It's already really tough. I think it'd be really awesome if we saw the progression with the Vertical Limit that we saw with the Cliffhanger, where this is the third kind of version of the Vertical Limit. Like, this kind of feels like the Sasuke 9 through 17 version of the Cliffhanger. I think we need the Shin Sasuke version of the Cliffhanger translated to the Vertical Limit now. I think we need a jump. And again, it would be really awesome to see. I don't know how difficult it would be. I don't know if that's too difficult. I think it is 100% too difficult if you're having all these obstacles in a row. I think if you maybe add in a break after the Cliffhanger, to have a jump within the Vertical Limit, I think would be a really, really interesting element to that. And really, that's what I do expect to see. I do expect the Vertical Limit to remain on the course, but be made more difficult. And I feel like that's probably the easiest way to make it more difficult is by making the competitors jump from ledge to ledge. But again, like, I just don't know how feasible that actually is in reality. And that leaves us to the final obstacle, the pipe slider. I don't know what to do with the pipe slider anymore. I feel like the pipe slider should probably go. It's obviously a really iconic obstacle, but it really hasn't done that much damage recently, mainly because they have added a notch that locks the bar relatively in place to make it a lot easier on the jump. Now, I think one of the easiest ways to make it more difficult is to remove that, but like at the same time, I feel like the pipe slider is an obstacle that is practiced enough that anyone that gets to it can do it. Now, I did talk earlier about the flying bar, but as I said, like, I think the flying bar is also just a solid first obstacle as well, as long as it has a solid obstacle immediately after it. Really, I think the thing that I personally would like to see here, I would like to see the grinding ring back. Now, if you don't know what that is, back in Shin Sasuke, the final obstacle of Stage 3 was the gliding ring. This ring that slid down a track, and at the end, you would jump to the platform. Again, a relatively easy obstacle, especially if you got the timing right. However, in Sasuke 21, the first time the obstacle was actually in tournament, it malfunctioned, where it didn't glide. Instead, it kind of grinded, where you had to hop the bar down the track and then also make the jump. That's the version of the obstacle I want to see. The obstacle that Nagano failed at the end of Sasuke 21, where you actually have to use the pipe slider-esque technique, but with a ring. And I feel like that's my ideal final obstacle for stage 3. More than likely, though, we're just going to see the pipe slider again. But that's really it for stage 3. Again, I don't fully expect there to be that many changes. I do expect probably like one new obstacle and then possibly some new format changes between the cliffhanger and the vertical limit. But outside of that, I do expect mostly the same stage 3. I think it's mostly going to be ramped up in difficulty, namely to take out Morimoto. But with that, let's move on to the final stage, which I will say I really like the current iteration of the final stage. We do have the spider climb to salmon ladder to rope climb. I don't see them actually changing this. And to be honest, I don't even know if I want them to change it. I really like it as is. I wouldn't be opposed to them just lowering the time limit by like 5 seconds. Make it a 40-second time limit. Obviously, Morimoto cleared it with like a little bit over 2 seconds. So I do think if you lower the time limit by 5 seconds, it still becomes a brutal final stage at that point, where even Morimoto would have to give the run of his life to even have a chance at clearing that. Like, I do feel like the final stage here is pretty perfect as is. Like, I don't have any real issues with it. I feel like it's mostly exactly what I want from it. Like, really, this is the dream final stage I had wanted for a really long time, back since the Shin Sasuke era. And the fact that we're finally getting it here, like, to just get rid of it almost immediately after it's been introduced, I think would be kind of disappointing. I mean, mind you, technically it was introduced in Sasuke 32, but you get the point. We haven't seen that many runs on it, and most of them have been from Morimoto himself. So I would like to see this final stage still stay there, just maybe reduce the time limit slightly. And there we go. I mean, that is my course prediction / speculation / wants. I don't expect there to be many changes. I think if anything, we're just going to see the return of some older obstacles, maybe a new obstacle here and there. Again, kind of similar to Sasuke 32. I think that's the most realistic approach that we're going to be seeing, where like maybe 1 or 2 new difficult obstacles in stage 1 and 2, probably an overly difficult stage 3 to guarantee that there isn't a winner, and then probably a very similar final stage. So those are my predictions for the course of Sasuke 39. Obviously, whenever we get Sasuke 39, I will be covering that. But for now, that is the video. Thank you for watching.